I go here, it brings me to the website.
Okay.
Then now it's gonna stay here for like a little bit. Oh, or not.
Okay, the green ones are already in use, so you can grab any of them that are not green. And so that's going to be just the number without the @techcampus.org.
Oh, okay.
And then it's the same password. Oh, it's good. It's good. Every time I get through one of these, it's always just a slightly different view, and it's weird the first time you do it.
So my password is just like my school password, right? Yeah.
It's the one you use for Tech Campus. Yep. That they gave you, that they assigned you.
Okay.
So, yeah, your session will be over in 244 minutes. Interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? So you shouldn't have to provide it again if you just click on the word login down below, because it passes through your credentials. But either way.
Yeah.
So the first time you log in, it takes a few minutes from a machine. So if you kind of remember what machine you logged into, it's a good idea. No,
I chose my favorite number, so
that's good. So once you guys have gotten logged into a machine one time, it makes a copy of a few things and it puts it on your machine for you. So this is telling you don't save anything on the desktop, because the desktop might go away. So once you click on OK there, I'd like you to open up the File Explorer, and you can do a nice demo for everybody.
Sure.
And if you look under My PC, you're going to see a drive letter you have access to. It's got your number on it. Yep, that's it. If you open that up, that's your H drive. H as in home. And your home drive, you can save work on it, and from anywhere in the lab, you can get to it. So instead of trying to save it on the C drive, you save it on the H drive.
So you can find it way faster.
Yep. All right. So while you're doing that, I can see what you're doing because we're sharing your screen. It's not a requirement that you share your screen this way, but that's what we're doing. I'd like you to click on the Start button in the lower left-hand corner, and then type in MUD for Mud.
Mudbox.
Yep. We're going to start Mudbox. Okay, I think Kenny was asking a question earlier, which is how do we get a sphere in Mudbox? So when you first start it, it wants to know what your shortcut keys should be, and I just use the defaults.
Oh, use the default?
Yeah, I just use the defaults.
Oh, oops, I think I've kind of changed it.
So hit cancel on that one then, and hit, let's see.
Or should I just I'll reset the system.
Yeah, just click on that X there and we'll restart Mudbox. Even if you use 3ds Max or something else, Mudbox has got a pretty compatible keystroke things. So that one you kind of have to say OK. And then click on OK on that one as well. That's basically, now this is a welcome screen. Once you close that, if you scroll down like he just did, there was a sphere. So let's try that again. File, New Project.
New scene, new project.
New scene, I'm sorry.
Fine.
And then stop right here for a minute. In the middle row, see the sphere? I want you to start with that sphere right there. That's a piece of mud right there. And now this is going to be a throwaway project, and it's not going to be perfect. Anybody who's a perfectionist, I want you to know that right now. Couple of concepts. I want you to know you can sculpt the mud, which is to change it around. And once you're done changing it, you can save a different copy of it. You're going to play with the materials, and then eventually you're going to add a paint layer. Now you can't see the individual polygons on this yet because it's not displaying that. So click on the word display in the upper left-hand corner, and I want to show you a couple of things under display. So about the fourth word over.
Oh yeah, my bad.
And see where it says grid? So grid is on, that's the background grid, but there's something else called wireframe. If you turn on the wireframe,
okay.
Yep, you'll see that that shows you basically how big this is as far as the number of polygons. Hold down Shift and press D. Hold down Shift and press D a second time, and hold down Shift and press D a third time. Now you've got 3 levels of detail, and that will be much better for you. So when you actually sculpt with 3 levels of detail, that's about as far as we want to push it in this curriculum. And we probably won't even use all these details when we get that asset in game. We'll use a different level of detail. But I wanted you to be able to see better what you can do with it. You're going to learn by doing here. If you've got a mouse, it'll make it a lot easier. And you're going to turn this sphere into a jack-o'-lantern. That's the basic setup. And yes, this is about playing with the tool a little bit.
It's like clay.
It is like clay, yep. So I'm going to thank you for letting us kind of do that as a demo. I'm gonna stop that right now and recording here. Now I'm going to start Mudbox on my machine. I can turn my camera off there because I'm already on the screen in this other view here. And to do so, I'm going to start just like you did by the start button in the corner. I'm going to type in MUD from Mudbox. And as it starts, there might be a couple of things a new user needs to click on, including a splash screen like this. I'm going to turn off this so it doesn't come up repeatedly for me. I'm going to click on OK. And this is a welcome screen. I'm going to leave it up because I'm kind of showing people their way around it. I'm going to click on OK. And at this point here, you'll notice I've got some projects I did in the past down the right-hand side. And you'll also notice that I've got the opportunity to start with a different piece of mud. And you've also got these starting movies. On your own, you can go through, and I would suggest you do the quick start tutorial. But what I'm going to do right now is just kind of do a speed run of the project because this is going to be recorded. When I click on a sphere, the first thing I want you to do is come up to where it says display, and we're going to turn on the wireframe to see some level of detail here. If I hold down Shift plus D, and I do that 3 times, my wireframe shows a lot more detail, and I can actually do sculpting with a greater effect. Another option in the display that will help you to keep oriented is called the grid. Now, we're going to turn this grid off whenever we go to do a capture of our work, but it helps you to kind of see an imaginary, well, kind of like a cutaway view or a floor, if you will. So if I can draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner, there is a box type shape that is used for manipulating something in 3D space. And I've got an example I'd like to use in the classroom to show a comparative idea. So the box, if you're seeing me on camera here, it's great. The box is representative of a control structure, which is different than an object. So if I have an object in my scene, I clearly know what the front is, what the back is, what the top is, and what the bottom is. But in order to keep track of that in 3D space, especially on a sphere, imagine, if you will, there's a control cube around it, and by rotating the cube, you effectively move the object around as well. So that upper corner is to allow you to be able to control your scene. And on this particular object, I don't have the letters, marked off for front, top, bottom, etc. But if I rotate it, you'll see that same effect here. As I move with my mouse, clicking and holding, I can move that object around in 3D space. So what they call front, we're going to use as a front. And if we think about now a jack-o'-lantern, and how different a jack-o'-lantern is from an actual ball, there's a couple of things. So I'm going to want you to model a flatter bottom, a stem on top, and some details around the side. There's a few ways to do this, but you're going to do your modeling first, and then later you can paint it. Today's goal is to come up with the jack-o'-lantern. Tomorrow we'll open the jack-o'-lantern, and we'll talk about carving a face into it. But just turning this first time into Mudbox, again, throwaway work. So if you get to a point where you don't like it, start over, restart this video that I'm making for you, and try to follow along, and don't be a perfectionist. You'll get better over time. So one thing about a jack-o'-lantern or a pumpkin is when they grow in a field, the bottom, and what I've just done is rotate to the bottom, tends to be flatter. So this is the bottom of the object. And what I'm going to do is make sure I'm on a sculpt tool. And I'm going to look along the group of options. Let me hide a couple of these for us. And I'll see there's an option to actually flatten. And on the flatten, it shows 2 red arrows as though it's pushing in. The next 2 concepts here are off to the right. When you're doing sculpting, they are the size of your brush and they are the strength of your brush. So if you hold your mouse over the object and you were to move the size up, you'd notice that the size becomes larger. Same with strength. With strength, you don't see a visual one, but it has to do more or less with how hard you're pushing when you're working with the tool. Another important thing is this mirror. I've got it off right now on purpose, but later, if I want to do something exactly the same on both sides, it's very useful. Not for what I'm doing right now, so I have that off. So I'm going to keep it off. And I'm just going to show you if I have my brush larger than the whole thing with flatten and I press down, nothing happens. What flatten's looking for is a difference in height from the side. So I need to make my size so that it's smaller. Now that I've made my brush smaller for a flatten operation, it's going to find a part that's higher and a part that's lower, and it will flatten it down. So as I press and move my mouse around, what I'm doing is I'm flattening the bottom of the sphere so it'll be more jack-o'-lantern-like. And as I click and hold, and as I more or less swim around, I flattened it. Now it's hard to tell it's been flattened in this view. So I'm going to rotate using the cube in the upper right to look at it, and you'll see I've got a flatter bottom, which happens when a large piece of fruit grows on the ground. The bottom typically gets misshapen from it. You don't have to be perfectly locked to the bottom to do flatten, and you might just play with this a little bit and see what that looks like. If you make a mistake, you can do a Control-Z to undo, and you'll see the effect of undoing your work on the mud. Questions so far? We started with a clay sphere. We talked about how to add 3 levels of definition with doing Shift D 3 times. We talked about rotating the object, selecting the flatten tool, and a couple different options on sizing the brush and the strength so that we flatten the bottom. The next thing I want to do is bring a stem out of the top. So to do so, I'm going to rotate so that I can see the top. I can also click right in the middle, and it will kind of orient it for me automatically. Now, yes, it's true you could grab a piece of the clay as indicated over to the left from flatten, but what I want you to try here for creating the stem is a different thing. It's actually right next to flatten on this side. That's called foamy. And foamy is going to be adding mud, almost like a whipped cream or a shaving cream spray. So I'm going to make sure I've got my settings, and I would suggest if you start with things about the middle, you can always go stronger or weaker, larger or smaller. You're putting yourself right in the middle of that range. I'm on the top. I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to kind of spin around, and I'm going to stop. I just kind of went around counterclockwise once or so. Again, you can't see the effect of it in this view, so I'm going to use the rotation cube to look from the side. I should see 2 changes now. One of them is the bottom is flatter, and the top has more of a stem on it. So I'm going to leave this at an off angle, not top, not side, just to play with this foamy, and I'm going to say that's the main part of the stem, and now what I want to do is make it smaller towards the top. It's easier if you're on a sketching pad, but what I'm going to do is move the size down, I'm going to move the strength down, and I'm going to circle over it again, and I'm going to move the size down, and I'm going to move the strength down, and I'm going to circle over it again. And now that you've kind of gotten a little bit of time playing with that on the top, you can also use a similar process on the bottom, because that's foamy effect will actually add a little bit of clay, and you can actually, now that you flatten the bottom, you might want to give it just some extra feature here. Now, I'm not worried about making it perfect, and you can combine flatten on top of foamy and end up with some rather unique combinations. So now we've done almost all of the work I want to get done with sculpting. We have a stem, we have a bottom. And now what we want to do is we want to make the sides so that they have those ridges on them. You can do this a number of ways with different tools. I'm actually going to use something called bulge. And with bulge, when I go to do this, I am going to use symmetry. And this is the first time I'm using the mirror. And when I do so, that's also just to indicate bulge is this tool. I'm using my head as a pointer. And over here below size and strength, I'm going to turn the mirror on. And when I click on X, you can see a white line showing I'll mirror whatever you do on one side of it onto the other side. If I wanted to do top and bottom, I would pick Y, and Z could do front to back. In this case, I'm going to pick on X, and I'll work on one side, and it'll mirror the change on the other side. So starting near the stem with the bulge tool, set to about half strength on both to kind of experiment with it, I'm going to start near the stem, and I'm going to rotate down near the bottom. Before I do anything else, because I might want to undo this, I'm going to rotate around to see what the effect is. It's your call on how big you want your sides to be. In my opinion, that's too strong. So remember, you can undo. And the reason I started with both of these about halfway is I can decide now to adjust them. Putting myself at an orientation where I can see where I am, such as front. I'm going to start on one side with the modified settings, and I'm going to start to draw in some lines. I'm going to rotate the object around a little bit. I'm going to start to draw in a line again. What I'm doing is I'm lining up the mirror one with the prior bulge. And so in effect, I'm using my prior mirror to end up with my next one. I'm not an artist. I'm not going to be able to tell you how to make yours look more realistic, but I want you to be familiar with this process, because even if you're not an artist, here's a case where I want to put one in the middle. Pardon me. And it makes more sense for me to turn my mirror off. So now if I look around, I've got, and the cool thing about a jack-o'-lantern is it's an organic object. So you don't want to have them perfectly symmetrical side to side. These imperfections are what you're going to find. You don't find much uniformity in all of the pumpkins in a pumpkin patch. Some are taller, some are more wide, and you can go with your standard pumpkin shape this time, and then later you can change it. So those are the basics: flattened bottom, stem on top, ridges. There's more you can do with it, but this is optional. And what I want to point out is you've got something called a stencil. And you can use a stencil as a pattern. So what I'm going to do is find one of these stencils, and by clicking on the stencil here, which had been off, I can see a pattern that looks kind of scratchy. If I want to use that and use the same tool like bulge, but do it through this scratchy area, you'll notice I added a very interesting and distinct pattern instead of a flat bulge. It might be that this jack-o'-lantern has got not just smooth edges, but it might actually have ones that I want to go over with a stencil and make them look a little bumpier. As I brought the stencil up, it gave me a number of options in the lower left-hand corner about moving it, rotating it, and scaling it. So small changes might make a reasonable difference. Middle mouse button to scroll can move your object. Holding S and moving it will move, S and then middle mouse button should be moving the stencil. So S, there we go. So now I can move it. S and left mouse button lets me size it. S and right mouse button lets me rotate it. So maybe for some reason you wanted to put this next set with the ridges going more sideways. This again is optional, but you might find it adds more realism on your jack-o'-lantern if you're not just sculpting straight, but actually add some of the stenciling effect to make it look a little more puckered. This is still considered modeling the geometry. Hopefully Hopefully I got my strength down enough here. And so I'm ending up with a more organic, less uniform object because of the stencil I'm using here to do my modeling. Some areas are going to be a little thicker in terms of the amount of the model effect. So I've played with this once a year over the past 5 years, I'd say, to make a jack-o'-lantern. And mine are just meh, because there's people that do this all the time. And I don't expect you to end up with a perfection. I want you to have fun with it. Don't be hard on yourself. Have fun with this. Any questions about what I've done so far, please ask. You can use public chat, private chat. You can speak up over mic. We should be doing this using the lab computers. It works on a Chromebook from home. I'm realizing that my stem actually should be in a slightly different position. I'm going to try to move my stencil up so that it's on the stem, and I'm going to rotate it. So I'm going to hold S and move my stencil up, and then I'm going to rotate my stencil so it lines up with my stem a little more. And I'm going to put, I don't like the stencil up there anymore. I'm just playing, and I want you to play around as well. Some of them are more like lizard skin, and let's see what this one might do for me. There we go. That looks like a good stem. I just happened to cross this one. No color here yet. We're just modeling the clay. And it should almost feel like you're touching clay when you kind of get used to working in this tool. Stems tend to have straighter lines on them. This is probably a wood grain that I'm grabbing, which is not a bad combination since the stalks tend to be woody. This doesn't look pretty. I almost feel like I got a big turd on top of mine, I'll be honest. But I'm not worried about it because I'm trying to just demonstrate some concepts here. At some point, you're going to be happy with your modeling, and I want to show you one more thing. This has got flattened bottom, stem on top, bulges or ridges, and a few more details. This is ready to be turned in for the day. This is your first day's activity. Have fun with it. Play with it as you like. To show off your work, I want to show you one more feature. I'm going to get back into display for a minute, and I'm going to turn off that grid, and I'm going to turn off wireframe because I don't want those in the way of the next part, which is to create a 360-degree view of this jack-o'-lantern that can be viewed in your portfolio. If by chance you happen to click on the word display and turn off meshes, you might think your work is gone. It's a kind of a common user mistake at the beginning. So you can turn that back on and your work's not actually gone. So now that I've got this with the grid off, the grid lines off, and the mesh showing, I'm going to go under where it says render. I'll move my head up to the top so it's easier to see where I'm clicking. Render, and it's called Create Turntable Movie. There's the object. 15 frames per second for 60 frames is going to give me a 360-degree view. I'm just going to leave all the defaults. And when I click on the word create, it's going to double check where it's going to be put. Ideally for you, you're going to save this on your H drive. So you would type in the letter H, /, probably put jack-o'-lantern, start, something like that. So I don't have an H drive on mine because I'm not logged in as a student. I'm going to save mine in this folder here. This will work for me. You guys shouldn't save yours. You guys shouldn't save yours on the C drive like I can. It's just a little bit different there. So what's happening right now is it's rendering out frame by frame in the background, and we're ending up with a 360-degree view. I don't need you to turn in that full movie. You could do a screenshot of this and show me what you did. So I got a message here that says, movie file was created successfully. If I go into the file folder view and I paste that path, I should see the jack-o'-lantern start. And if I open that file up, this will loop, and it's showing me a 360-degree view of the jack-o'-lantern that I just modeled. And that will repeat over and over again. Picking up here tomorrow, what we'll be doing is adding your logo to the bottom, painting the object, sculpting the object, doing a little bit more touch-up, and then you'll be doing a rendition in turntable style of your jack-o'-lantern prepped for Halloween. What do you think of the project so far? Any questions or thoughts? Is it interesting at all?
This was fun. I mean, like, I've always thought about 3D animation, or maybe I was like, I thought I'd be bad at it, but it doesn't seem too bad at first.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and we will be doing more with animation, and this is an example where, and if you go into help, and this is a big thing, is if you've got time, you can connect to the lab, and these 1-minute startup movies are very helpful. Same with just going into Mudbox help. And so, Jacob, you're not finding Mudbox on your computer. I just found that on your. All right, I'm going to stop this recording for now as I do some troubleshooting for students. My screen here. So one of the things I wanted to make sure I talked about, how do you apply stencils? Okay. All right, so somebody found Mudbox. That's good. All right, so I'm recording now. I'm going to hide public chat for a minute. I'll show you stencils. Stencils are in the area that's off to the right. So let me show my mouse pointer. On the screen here, it says stamp and stencil. They're slightly different features. So I'm going to use a stencil over here, and I'm going to use the stencil to change first the geometry or the mud on the bottom of the jack-o'-lantern. I'm going to put the maker's mark on it, so to speak. So this isn't very flat right now. First, I'm just going to flatten it. So I've got a flatter area to put I'm going to make it larger. So I'm using the flatten, just like I did before, making an area that I could put, whatever I desire on a nice flat area. So under stencils, in addition to the ones that are there, there's this very small arrow. So can you see this arrow right here, just below the word stamp, even though I'm on stencil? Can you see that? When I click on it, I can actually add another stencil. Now, a stencil needs to be a black and white image. And the black and the white are going to be what we call an alpha channel. It's a vocabulary word. So if I go into my pictures and I find something that's mostly black and white, something simple like this here, I can use this as a stencil. So I'm going to open this up, and now that I've got a stencil, I'm going to rotate it around. So I'm going to use S for stencil and the middle mouse button to move it. And I'm going to scale it using the button. And there's going to be a black, you can see hopefully an image of me. It happens to be upside down, but because this is a 3D object, it's okay. And I'm going to use this thing that says foamy, and I'm going to go over my stencil. Now, foamy doesn't look very clear at all. It's actually kind of yuck. I don't like that at all. So I'm just going to do an undo. And instead of doing that, I will do imprint. And I'm going to imprint that object. Now that I've done an imprint, I'm going to hide my stencil with a Q. I'm going to move it around. And I've imprinted my face onto the bottom of the jack-o'-lantern. It's a 3D imprint of me. A little bit awkward. I don't like that imprint depth's a little bit too strong. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to bring the stencil back up. I'm going to go back into imprint. Oh, it's to be used with the stamp image. So let me get into a stamp image and add a stamp image and grab myself this way. There's a stamp image. And let's see if I look at that. Yeah, that's still too deep. I have to work on this. Image on, import export. I'm going to invert the values, which means white becomes black, black becomes white. I'm going to flip the horizontal because I want this lined up a little bit better on the bottom. I'll move this right there. Visibility is fine. It's got to be something with the strength here I'm doing wrong. Multiplier, going to move the multiplier down. Let's just try this. I'm not sure why I'm getting all of these random things, but yeah, that'll work better. So it's kind of a weird object that I'm putting on there because it's not truly a black and white image of the complete me, but if you know what it is, you can see it. I'm going to undo that one and bring myself back in as a different stamp here. I'm going to find one that's not just black and white. Highlight that one. I don't think this is what I want to do. I'm more used to stencils. Oh, this is getting really weird on me. All right, I'm going to back off because I'm not sure what's going on here. My stencil's not just looking weird. Yeah, very weird. Very, very weird. Good question. Flatten that all out. I should do a regular, like, stencil of something that's just a black and white image here. Complete, normal. Let's try that one. Yeah, that works. All right. This should be a fun activity for you. I want you to work on getting a jack-o'-lantern. Don't worry about stamps and stencils. I'm going to turn this one off because it's not helping me at all. And be ready tomorrow to start doing some more. If you want to start reading ahead and looking at paint, you can. But I'm going to give you guys some hands-on time. I'll be around with my mic muted and my camera off, but if you need help, ask. And there is an assignment in Google Classroom for you to turn this in. Thank you.